movements that want pain, movements that want oppression, movements that want to put one class of people against another class of people, over and above another kind of person. It's easy sometimes with Exodus. We talked about this series is kind of meant to show the strange, weird parts of the Bible that maybe don't fit in with the way we know the trajectory moves. So we have our guiding kind of text, Revelation 21, where we see a world of peace and justice and love and no pain, and God is all in all things to all people. And sometimes we look at other parts, the Old Testament, even the New Testament, though, and we think, this doesn't seem to line up with Jesus or what I know about where this world is headed because of Jesus, and so that these passages don't make sense to us. Exodus it's not always like that, because it kind of fits in just perfectly, right? Like deliverance of slaves, freedom from oppression, redemption. Those fit in with Jesus. That's Jesus' mission. In fact, so many times, I don't know if there's another Old Testament book that's more quoted or more alluded to in the life of Jesus than Exodus. More quoted or more alluded to in the writers of the New Testament than the book of Exodus. But the series isn't just about the parts that don't fit. It's also about learning to see these stories in new ways, learning to let the Bible speak in fresh ways, to let go of some of the baggage that we've brought in from our religious past, and to take on new baggage, new ways of looking at these stories. Exodus has a lot to tell us. It's a large book, but there's a lot packed in there too. I was looking at commentaries this week regarding Exodus, and I need some resources here, and I noticed that commentaries on Exodus tend to be way longer. They're really thick, thousands of pages. And then you have Leviticus, and it's this big because no one wants to deal with it. And then there's all these other books, even the New Testament books, where the Christian church kind of centers around. People don't write as much about it. There's not as much historical background. There's not as much weird, crazy things going on. There's not as much drama. Exodus really sets the story in a lot of ways for the rest of the flow of the Bible. So it's an important book. Today we're going to look at some of these stories in Exodus and see how they can shape us and give us words, especially in our modern context, because that's important to remember. Once you can unpack what's going on in its original context, there's some really amazingly powerful things that speak to our modern context, especially when we're faced with movements of oppression or people who seek to put other kinds of people down. Now, here's the thing. Before we move on, you may be thinking hey, why are you talking about Charlottesville? Because it's just one weekend, right? And it's just a few hundred people. I saw this meme that somebody put, and it was in one sense very hopeful, and it kind of made me think. It said, the largest white nationalist meeting in years had 400 people or whatever. Whereas 80% of people are going to be in churches this Sunday, and 60% of people are going to go to work tomorrow and work with mixed races, and 70% of whatever. I was like, yeah, I guess, right? Yeah, not everyone. The world's not completely bad, right? There's lots of beauty and goodness in the world. But it's not an isolated incident either. If you look around the world right now, our political scene around the world, other countries are dealing with fascism arising, with nationalism, with the idea that if we can purify our country, of the people who have come in and messed it up, then we'll have peace and justice again, right? It's classic scapegoating, and it's not just happening in America, it's happening in Europe. It's very interesting that it's kind of back on the rise. So I don't think it's something to not be talked about. I don't think it's something to focus on, but I don't think it's something to not address. And I struggle with it, to be honest with you. This week, a lot of pastors aren't honest. I've noticed that. You have to say something to toe the line. You have to make it feel like your life's okay so everyone else feels like their life's okay. But that's not how it is. And I think everybody knows that. And embracing it's a good thing. I struggled this week because I thought, I was on Twitter. It's amazing how much it influences us. Actually, I wasn't on Twitter. My wife was on Twitter, and she was showing me some Christian leaders who were tweeting saying, if your pastor doesn't do X, Y, or Z this Sunday, leave your church. And it's well, come on, man. I mean, that's a lot. there's a lot of different communities out there, right? Like, we're all different, so unique, informed by our neighborhoods and the people around us. And is there really like one answer fits all for responding to something like Charlottesville? I don't think so. And then I saw other Christians saying, you know, well, my church is just going to keep preaching the message of Jesus. As if the message of Jesus is somehow divorced from dealing with political realities. Because it's not, right? Like, the message of Jesus was he came and he spoke into very real political situations, oftentimes not that much different than what happened in Charlottesville. So it's not just keep talking about the Bible as if it's divorced from reality. And it's not, you better get up there and denounce these racists or everyone leave. Like, there has to be something else, right? There has to be something else. Honestly, I had decided on not even talking about what happened in Charlottesville, not even talking about issues of race or whatever. But as I was reading Exodus, I realized how intensely it speaks to some of these issues, especially the first few chapters. So we're going to look at that today. We're going to look at that. I don't know if that's like a coincidence or like a divine movement or if somehow those are always tied together, but that's where we are. If you remember, Genesis ends with Joseph, right? And, hold on, let me get the slides up here. Genesis ends with Joseph. He's vice Pharaoh. Everyone from his family, Jacob and all his other brothers and stuff, they came to Egypt to live during the famine. They're well taken care of. That's where Genesis ends. Exodus picks up right immediately after that. In fact, the first word of Exodus is and. The first Hebrew word is a word that functions very much like our English word and, connects it together. Joseph was, the vice Pharaoh, all his family died. All his family came. He died. Here's the sons of Jacob. And then Exodus says, here's the sons of Jacob again. It kind of just goes back, recaps the story, flows right into it. It's a direct continuation of what happens. And if you remember in the story, Pharaoh gave Joseph all this power because of his wisdom, because of his intellect. That ended up being able to save not just Egypt, not just the Hebrew people, but essentially like the ancient Near East. They had all this food that they could sell back to the people that needed it. Well, when we get into Exodus, we see this. Joseph has died. That Pharaoh that gave Joseph all that power died, and a new Pharaoh comes to town, and it says that he doesn't regard Joseph anymore. He doesn't think Joseph's anything special, and by extension, any of Joseph's people. And he's faced with this problem now of, there's a lot of people who aren't like us around. There's a lot of non-Egyptians living in our country. So Pharaoh decides he's going to make Egypt great again, right? He had a red hat, set it on top. Actually, it's probably like a white mitre, set it on top. Make Egypt great again. And that was what he ran on. And he says, how can we stave off this evil coming from this other group of people in our midst? So he comes up with a plan and he says, let's force them into labor. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies. They'll fight against us. They'll leave the country. There's this textual thing going on in Exodus where Genesis creation language is kind of mimicked. And we're going to see that in Pharaoh. He's kind of like this anti-creation guy, and we're going to unpack that a little bit. But let's look at what he says. The Israelites have become far too numerous for us. What is he saying? There's 3 points that you can draw out from Pharaoh's little monologue here. And it's what happens every time with oppressors. It's a classic line of reasoning. Pharaoh did it, other kings in the Bible did it, Hitler did it, right? Like any group that tries to scapegoat in their nation uses this line of thinking. You have willful ignorance towards the other, right? So the text says that he did not remember Joseph. Obviously he remembered Joseph, like mentally remembered him. There's Hebrews all over the place. The Egyptians took really good notes. Like they found receipts from like personal transactions among neighbors that have been preserved thousands of years. He knew Joseph, right? When it says he didn't know him, he didn't remember, it means he didn't regard him anymore, didn't care, intentionally just left him aside. Willful ignorance of the other. Not willing to see all the good that came from the Hebrew people being in the nation, not willing to see all the good that Joseph and his family brought. the use of fear to control people. So he tells the people, we have to deal shrewdly with them or they'll outnumber us. Well, what's the problem if they outnumber the Egyptians? Really, right? How does he know it will lead to them joining their enemies? How does he know it will lead to violence breaking out? There's no way of knowing that. It's just something to incite fear in his people. And then, of course, the third one is economic anxiety to incite anger against a scapegoat. They might leave the country, he tells the people. If they do that, we'll lose all their cheap labor. So we have to find a way to balance not letting them grow more numerous and exploiting them for the goods they give to us. That's the dynamic he wants to hold the Hebrew people in. And this is really what demonstrates him as an anti-creation figure, right? Because if you remember in the creation story, humanity is the image of God on earth. Where do we see God on earth? How can we know that God's creator? What displays God? Humanity. But Pharaoh doesn't see humanity as the image of God. He sees humanity as like labor capital, something to be exploited for the good of his power, something to be used and thrown away if necessary, whatever it takes, just another tool in the building of an empire. So he doesn't see humanity as the image of God. He sees the Hebrew people as something to exploit. Either there'll be a political force against us, which we don't want, or they may just up and leave, which we don't want. So how can we figure this out? So he comes up with a plan. He says, let's force them into labor. And their labor will be so hard and so difficult. One, we'll get stuff done for free. That's nice. Two, they'll be too tired to bear children. And their numbers will decrease. Perfect plan, right? He balances the Hebrew people the way he wants to. The problem is, what ends up happening is they keep having babies. You know, they go to work, they do their hard labor. The only thing to do when they get home, and they keep bearing children, right? And so he's freaking out now. He's like, too many. So he tells the midwives for the Hebrews, he says, hey, when you go to help deliver these children, if it's a boy, kill it. And if it's a girl, let it live, right? Again, he's viewing humanity here as something to exploit for his own good. Let the girls live. Why? So we can take them as our own wives and integrate them into society. Let the men die. Why? Because they could be military threats or they could be, something that they could more easily rise up. So he wants to destroy the men, keep the women as property. But the midwives, it says that, they understood the whole creation image of God dynamic. It says they regarded God too highly to kill the baby boys. So they lie to Pharaoh. They make up this story. They're like, these Hebrew women, they call us. We get the call they're in labor. By the time we get there, the baby's already born. I mean, what do you want us to do then? We're not going to just take it out of the arms and kill it. At that point, it's too late. Pharaoh's like, oh, yeah, well, okay. Somehow he buys it that every single Hebrew woman ever giving birth to a boy, beats the midwives, right? But he is ignorant. We already saw that. So then his final solution, right, is to just have the other Egyptian people, when they see a Hebrew baby boy, to kill it. To throw it in the Nile is actually what he says. So if you see that a Hebrew woman, one of your neighbors, has a baby boy, take the baby boy, you have authority to do this, and throw it in the river. Heartless, cruel, destructive, obviously completely against the flourishing of humanity. So this begins to happen, and we see the story of a woman who has this baby boy, and the text says that she sees in him beauty and that mother's love completely saves this baby boy, right? So in Exodus, you see this theme a lot, the feminine. It's something that for some reason gets overlooked in the Bible, but you have these very, very strong, powerful women, right? So you have the midwives who don't care anything about what Pharaoh says. You have this woman who, when she sees her boy, it says that he was just so beautiful. And she says, I'll be damned if they kill this baby. So she builds him a little basket, and she commits him into the cold, dark hands of the Nile River. She'd rather see him float away, potentially to safety, than to let him be taken from her and murdered. And then we see a third strong woman who comes to the rescue. This woman's walking along the Nile River, and she sees this little basket boat thing, And she sees this little baby, and he's crying, and he just, he doesn't know what's going on. So she picks him up, and she loves him. She sees his beauty just as his mother did. And she sees that he's a Hebrew, probably because he's floating in the river. She probably assumed it because, someone left him out to expose, to die, just like the law said. And she says, I want this baby for my own. I'll raise him as my son. She's Pharaoh's daughter. That's what's interesting about this woman. You know what she should have done when she saw that basket is pick it up and dump it out and walk away. Right? That was what the law was. That's what her father, the most powerful man in the world, or at least the third most powerful man in the world at the time, decreed. Her own father, the Pharaoh, the king of the land, said, if you see a Hebrew baby boy, throw him in the river. She finds him in the river and takes him as her own. Beautiful. Well, she looks around and she says, how am I going to feed this little baby boy? And there's a little girl looking at through the reeds, scouting out what's happening. Because it's this little baby's sister. She wants to make sure her baby brother's okay. So, the woman says, Pharaoh's daughter says to the little girl, hey, Hebrew girl, find me someone to feed this baby. And the little girl says, I think I might know somebody. I think I might have someone. So this little baby's original mother actually gets paid to nurse this baby. A small comfort, obviously, knowing you still have to give up your son. But a comfort nonetheless, knowing that he's not going to die. So she nurses her son. Pharaoh's daughter names him Moses. The text says that Moses is a Hebrew word for being drawn out of the water. A more likely thing, as you look at the etymology of the word, is that Moses is short for Thutmose, right? The common Egyptian name, because it's highly unlikely that the woman would have known Hebrew, being Pharaoh's daughter. And as we see later, it's actually important, and it becomes a point of contention, Moses' Egyptianness. So little baby Thutmose, Moses for short, grows up as the grandson of Pharaoh. Quite a rags to riches thing, right? Kind of like Joseph. Should have been killed in Egypt. Logically should have been killed. Should have been thrown in the river, should have been eaten by crocodiles, or drowned, or something. But he didn't. He was rescued and raised as potentially the next Pharaoh. Well, he grows up, and many years later, he decides to go check out what's going on with his original people, the Hebrews. Apparently, he knew he was Hebrew, but the text says that he didn't go and visit. When he was grown up, he decided to go see what was going on. And he saw that they had to work very hard, and they were forced to labor. And he saw an Egyptian man beating up a Hebrew man. Something comes alive within him. He doesn't like this injustice. He realizes this is wrong, that these are his people, that these are human beings, image of God people. And he goes and he kills that Egyptian man for it. Buries him in the sand. The next day he's going back down to see what's happening, and he sees some Hebrew men fighting each other, right? Now Moses thinks he's all like Hebrew. He thinks he knows what's going on. He thinks he knows the dynamics of a people who he's never spent time with. And he says to them, hey, stop fighting each other. You're on the same side. And they say, what are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian? No respect for Moses. They don't listen to him. They don't give him the time of day. And why should they? You can't swoop in and save the day and then go back and live in the palace of the person who's oppressing the people. So they don't listen to him. They reject him. And now Moses realizes he's in a really bad spot because he's in trouble for murdering the guy, the Egyptian, but his own people rejected him as well. So he flees into the wilderness, and he spends some time with these people called the Midianites, and he goes to this well, and he's getting himself some water because he's thirsty from his journey, and some daughters of this local priest named Jethro come, and they're getting water for their sheep and camels and stuff. And some shepherds come, and they start messing with the women, giving them a hard time. Moses saves them from the shepherds, right? And they're really excited about this. They run home, they tell their dad, hey, an Egyptian man just saved us from these shepherds. This is such an important verse. Right? It's just part of the story when you're reading it. You don't think anything about it. But look what they tell their father. An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds, they answered. And then he drew water for us, and he watered our flocks. Why do they think Moses is an Egyptian? There's two reasons, right? It has to be one of these. Either he told them that, or they assumed it, right? It's one of those, isn't it? Either he told them I'm an Egyptian, or they assumed it. And if they assumed it, why would they assume it? Maybe he looked like an Egyptian. Maybe he was dressed like an Egyptian. Maybe he spoke Egyptian to them. Whatever it was, they thought he was an Egyptian. There's nothing Hebrew about Moses right now. There's nothing to say that those oppressed people are his people or that he's with them. Well, he ends up marrying one of these daughters named Zipporah, and he stays with Jethro's family for many years, and he's a shepherd helping raise sheep, probably to sacrifice because Jethro was a priest. And one day he's out in the wilderness, and he's tending the sheep, and he sees that this bush is on fire, but it's not burning up, it's not being consumed, it's just staying on fire, like a candle or something. But it's a bush, it should be consumed, and he's very confused. So he kind of goes over to it, and then the bush speaks to him, and so now he's freaked out. He takes off his shoes because this is sacred ground, this is holy, something strange is happening, and the bush, do you like how this has become the burning bush? I like this. And the bush says to him, Moses, I'm God. And he's like, what? And he says, I'm the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. First time that Moses is said to be like a Hebrew in a strong way, right? The bush calls him a Hebrew. The bush tells him his God is the God of his fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then he says, I have a secret name, it's Yahweh and all this stuff, and we can unpack that. We've done it before, but we're actually not doing that today. Today's not about the burning bush. Today's not about who God is and the mystery and all of that. Today is about that the bush tells him, you will go rescue my and your people. You will rescue the Hebrew people from their slavery. I've heard their cry. Their oppression has awoken me. The text actually says that, right, when you begin in the beginning of Exodus, God's not there. He's not speaking. Nothing's happening. And then when the people cry out under the burden of slavery and the burden of oppression, something happens. And it says God remembers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The oppression almost brings into existence this divine reality manifested in the burning bush. And so Moses says, I will not do it. I will not go. And he's like, yes, you will. And they go back and forth like this for a while. And Moses says something very interesting. At one point he says, who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? Moses is right here. Like, he hit the nail on the head. Who is Moses to do this? He has no right to stand before Pharaoh, right? A criminal, someone who fled the country because of murder. And he has no right to lead the people because he's never done anything to show himself to be in solidarity with them before. Who is this guy with no identity? But God says, just do it. I'm going to give you the words to say. Your brother Aaron will help you. Like, there's plenty of resources at your disposal. Stop arguing. You're going to go save the people from oppression. So he agrees to it. And he packs up Zipporah, and he packs up his children, and they start riding towards Egypt. God meets him again. Tells him some more details about it. Hey, you need to tell Pharaoh this and this. He meets him another time and says, hey, you need to tell Pharaoh this and this, by the way. They're like going back and forth as they're traveling. They're dialoguing about what this is going to look like to free these people from oppression. And then we have one of the strangest passages. One of the most out of place phrases. It shook me, honestly. I read it and I was like, what? That must have been like an edit. That must have been a scribe forgot to take it out or something, because it does not fit with the flow of the story at first glance. I think you know where I'm going to go with this. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. What? They literally were just discussing the details on how to get the Israelites out of Egypt. The verse before. The Lord met Moses and was about to kill him. Why? What's happening? But Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, and touched Moses' feet with it. Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me, she said. So the Lord left him alone. How does this make any sense? What is happening here? What is going on in this story? I'm so glad we get to have a weird story. I love the weird stories. They're the best, because when you unpack them, you find some really cool stuff. So, it's really interesting. You should go Google this passage today and read the stuff that comes up, because people have like a bunch of crazy ideas. They'll like say, I think that like God was thinking, and they just start making up stuff. Like, what do you mean God was thinking something? Like, don't just deal with what the text has, right? And the first way to do that is to ask yourself, is there any precedent for this? Does this occur anywhere else? Is this some like one-off unique thing? And as we look at it, we realize it's not. Circumcision. Did you think that was going to be the next word I said? Circumcision, if you remember, was the sign of the covenant between Abraham and this God Yahweh. And he said to Abraham, if any of your children, or if any of your males are not circumcised, they'll be cut off from the people. Pun intended. Pun intended, I do believe. They'll be cut off from the people. You cannot be a part of this group. You cannot be a part of this tribe. You cannot be a part of this covenanted people if your males are not circumcised. Okay? That's weird. But we know that it became an identity marker, didn't we? Like, so much so that to say that someone was uncircumcised was like a curse. Like, oh, those uncircumcised Philistines telling us what to do. Oh, that uncircumcised heathen crazy person. Like, it became like an insult. And if you remember in the New Testament, as Jewish Christians started integrating non-Jewish Christians in their communities, there's this huge debate over it. Because it was such an identity marker that they needed to figure out, like, wait a minute, do the non-Jewish Christians need to be circumcised? I mean, what do we do with this? Like, it was so important to them that there were huge debates. People got angry, heated, argued about it. They finally decided that you didn't have to. But the point is that it's such a strong identity marker for the people of Israel. It is what defines you on the surface, right? A physical way of showing you belong to this group. But did you know that circumcision was not unique to Israel? The Egyptians circumcised. The Phoenicians circumcised. What's interesting about Egyptian circumcision, I know you're interested in it. I had a picture, but I was like, nah, I can't put it up. It's hieroglyphic style. It's from Egypt. It's not like an actual picture, but like it's got the two guys, and it's like two different ways to do it. It's really funny. It even has text underneath it. And the one on the left is like they're holding the guy's arms back. One guy is, and the other guy's cutting. And it says, his says, just hurry up and do what you're going to do. And then the other one, there's no guy holding the arms back. It's like he's like got his hand on the other guy who's going to do the cutting, and he's like ready for it. And he says, sharpen the knife a lot so it doesn't hurt as much, right? So there's two ways to do it. You can just like get it over with fast and just, or you can like sharpen the knife a lot and make sure it doesn't hurt too bad. So the Egyptians circumcised, but what's interesting is that they did a partial circumcision. They didn't do it the same way the Hebrews did. In fact, in the book of Joshua, this is called the shame of the Egyptians, right? So they used circumcision, but they didn't do it the same way as the Hebrews, and so it was still this strong identity marker. Now there's another story, a Phoenician story that's almost identical to this, where a god is about to kill a man, and the man's wife takes the knife and cuts off her son's foreskin, and she touches the man, and it somehow counts towards him. Like kind of like a in your place thing, like you are now circumcised on behalf of the family because I circumcised the son. Zipporah took a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, touched Moses' feet. You know that feet in the Old Testament can be a euphemism, right, for the sexual organs. So you have the story where Ruth slept at Boaz's feet, right, and suddenly he's like ready to do anything for her. You have the story where Saul goes into the cave to uncover his feet, and David could have killed him, but didn't, right? So feet is like a euphemism. So she touches, in fact, I don't know why English translations keep it this way. I guess because it's embarrassing to go the other route. The Message tries it, and it says that she cut off her son's foreskin and touched it to Moses' member. So, there's no right way to say it. There's no right way to say it. But the point is that she touches it to the place of Moses that should have been circumcised, but probably wasn't, right? Probably wasn't, because he was raised by Egyptians. He may have had the partial circumcision. He may have had the shame of Egypt all over him. So what do we learn from this? That God's really, really mad if someone's not circumcised? No. Circumcision, as I said, was the physical marker of belonging to a community. And as Moses is preparing to go and be with this community of people, to represent them before Pharaoh, to lead them out of their oppression, to bring them out from under the hand of slavery, he has to be all in. He has to give up all of the markers that show him as Egyptian, right? That all of the things he's clinging to remain like the oppressor if he's going to be effective with the Israelites. He has to take on their identity. He has to fully stand in solidarity with them. So what does that mean for us? How do we bridge that context? Because right now in the world, more than likely, for most of us in here, we're not oppressed. In fact, for most of us in this room, we bear the physical signs of the oppressor, don't we? Of the powerful, of the mighty. In our context, the ones who seem to care most about one group being over another group look like most of us in here. White Christians. Right? If you had gone to Charlottesville last weekend, most of us would have fit in with that crowd. Most of us would have not been able to been told apart. And that matters. That's a big deal. It mattered for Moses, and it matters for us. It's just a fact of life that some of us are born into a better place than others. That's just the way life goes. Some of us are born with more money up front. Some of us are born with more opportunity. But the move we learn from Moses is, what do you do with that place you were born to? What do you do with the power you've achieved over the term of your life? What do you do with the place you've earned? Do you cling to it? Do you cherish it? Are you afraid to give it up? Do you cling to those identity markers of power and prestige? The story tells us that if you do cling to those, if there's something that mattered to you, that means something to you, if you're afraid to give them up, you'll die. God's not going to kill you. I don't believe that. But you'll lose a part of what it means to be truly human. You'll lose a part of what it means to have real, abundant life if you're clinging to the things that make you feel safe in your prestige, in your power, in your privilege, in your place in the world. There's a beautiful story of this man who lived in Nazi Germany. He was a Catholic priest. And as things started getting really bad for the Jewish people, as they were moving towards the final solution, he was going to his superiors and he said, look, this is not Christian. This is clearly not what Jesus was about, and we're Catholics, we're supposed to be about that. We should do something. We should use our power to speak out, right? We have a lot of influence. We're a big institution. He kept getting shut down, kept getting told to be quiet, all right? We're not going to rock the boat on this one. We're just going to see how it plays out. Eventually, he realized that he had only one course of action. There was only one thing he could do that could be truly Christian. He left his place as a Catholic priest. He gave it up. He registered as a Jewish person. Right? His papers said he was Jewish. He wore the star on his clothes. He wasn't. Didn't have to do that. He wasn't Jewish. But he took on the identity markers of the people at that time who were being oppressed. He stood with his fellow human beings, people he knew were the image of God. And as you can imagine, he was taken to a concentration camp and eventually killed. It's kind of the anti-Moses move, It's actually the exact opposite. Hebrew person trying not to be, and then this guy's not, and he's trying to be. But there is no more Christian act than that. There is no more Christian act than to give up the thing that gives you the power, the safety, the comfort, the security, and to bind yourself to those who don't have it. We see it in that Catholic priest in Germany, but we also see it in Jesus. And I've quoted this so many times, but I think it's meant to be quoted. The song from the Apostle Paul, "Remember and imitate Jesus, who, although being in very nature God, did not count that equality with God as something to be grasped onto, held tightly, but took upon himself the form of a servant." Emptied himself, right, of all, any sense of worth or value or power. Anything that could say, hey, oh, I deserve this, I'm fill in the blank. I make too much money to do that, right? A Kravitz, a Castillo, a whatever doesn't act like that. Is your family, is your wealth, is your race, is your religion something that's giving you safety, security, something you're clinging to, something you wouldn't give up because you're afraid of it? Whatever it is for you, you must let it go. You must hold it with open hands. Am I saying that if your Christianity gives you comfort, you should go turn into a Hindu or something? No. But you should certainly do what that Catholic priest did. If it meant that you had to denounce Christendom to embrace another institutional religion because it saved millions of lives, you should do it. If it meant not marching with your race of people and marching with a different race of people who were being oppressed, you should do it. If it means giving up the security that comes from the money you've made, you should do it. Whatever it is for any of us, I pray that we can learn, as Moses learned the hard way. Quite a scene, having your son's foreskin speedily cut off and touched to you. I hope we can learn, like he did, to give up the markers of power that surround us in order to better serve the people in our culture who need it most. Let's pray. You are the God of the oppressed. It's hard for us to read Exodus and to understand it fully, because for most of us, we kind of understand the dynamics of Egypt more than the dynamics of Israel. We've never been in that situation. We've never had to cry out for freedom, for justice. Moses never had to cry out either, but he learned to. Teach us to cry out on behalf of others, on behalf of the people who need justice the most, on behalf of the oppressed, and to give up whatever we have to give up in that quest. In Jesus' name, amen. As I said, there's no greater marker of this than Jesus, who on the night that he was betrayed, he took bread and he broke it and he said, "Take this bread, eat it. As often as you eat it and remember me. Because this is my body broken for you. This body that I took on so that I could disrupt the systems of power and purpose and meaning that keep so many enslaved." And then he took the wine and he said, "Drink this, friends. And every time you drink it in remembrance of me. As often as you drink this, you're instituting the new covenant again and again. A covenant that says we can give up whatever identity marker we need to give up for the good of the world around us. A covenant formed on my life," Jesus says. A life willing to give up institutional rules, racial biases, anything else. So come today, take the bread and eat it. Take the juice, drink it. Go back to your seat. Listen to the music that will be playing over the speakers. Let this fill you. Let this be something that can bind us all together as a family that is for the good of others. Come and partake.